Welcome back, Michelle.
I'm back. How are
You're
you this
back.
morning, Stephen?
Pretty good. And you're back. Are you better than ever?
Um, yeah, I'll say I'm better than
Yeah.
ever. Of course. Happy to be here with you. Stephen, there's a couple of things I wanted to congratulate you about this week. First of all, you did fantastically well all on your own last week. I was very impressed. I did
Thank
watch the
you.
replay. There were a few stumbling blocks, but overall, I thought you did really well. Congratulations. So
Well, I got to say,
I'm obviously
StreamYard makes it
optional.
easy.
I'm
StreamYard is
obviously
a nice
optional.
app.
Yeah, you like it, eh? It's good. It's
Yeah,
good fun. And also, I understand you got some good news from the folks at Live Sequel this morning.
that's right. Can you share my? Oh, I can share my screen, right?
Oh dear, that's not okay.
So hopefully you all know about Live SQL. I use it all the time to demo, and all my scripts are up there. So when I was with Oracle, at first I published like 250 scripts. Then I left Oracle. Now I'm publishing under the InSum, or actually my Gmail account. And you can't publish scripts for public consumption until they're reviewed. And I got this amazing news today that because I have submitted high quality scripts, several of them recently, looks like I triggered an automatic approval process. So now I can publish my scripts without any intermediary or delay. Yay!
Yay, well done. Well, I would say if anyone deserves automatic approval, I'm going to say should be you.
Me.
So well done. Yes,
Yeah,
Stephen,
thank you.
you the man.
I'm trusted at Oracle Live SQL once again.
Awesome.
Nice.
Stephen, you're talking SQL error message today.
Right. So today I thought I'd follow up on the SQL code session I did 2 weeks ago. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, I got bursitis on my elbow. I got to do so. I need new elbows. I need maybe an extra pair of elbows would be good if I could swap them out so I could do even more invasive removal work. But I'm getting old. I'm falling apart. You won't be seeing me too much longer for Feuertips.
Oh, Stephen,
Anyway,
that's a terrible thing to say.
it could happen any day. So anyway, so a couple of weeks ago, I did a session on SQL code. That was a lot of fun, exploring some mysteries, learning new things that I didn't know about before. And I thought I'd follow up and kind of go for closure by also covering SQL Error Message, sqlerrm. So let's dive in. After that, we'll take a look at a few great organizations helping to heal the planet. I've got an amazing book I want to share with you, even if I know you're never going to buy it. So let's go into SQL Error Message. So the SQL Error Message function is probably something you've been using for years, and you use it, you call it basically an exception handler to get the generic, not the generic error, the error message for the current error, basically for SQL code. But there are probably a number of things you're not aware of with SQL Error Message. One is that not only does it return the current error message, but you can pass it an error code and it returns the generic error message for that code. I'll talk about what it means to be generic. But also, interestingly enough, Oracle recommends that you not use SQL Error Message and instead use DBMS utility format error stack unless you're working with for all save exceptions. And even though they don't document it, with log errors as well. Okay, so why don't you share my screen? No, I can share my screen. And let's go over to SQL Developer and take a look. And let's increase the font size. I thought I was completely prepared for my audience. Now it's going to freeze because it's going to reconnect. So let's see while that's happening. So actually, stop sharing my screen for a sec while that's reconnecting. So one thing that's interesting that came up 2 weeks ago with SQL code is that I said, look, you can't call it inside a SQL statement, only from PL SQL. And Nils Hecker, who may or may not be on the call today, probably is on the session today, said, but wait, if you call sys.standard.SQL code, then you can reference it inside a SQL statement. I'm like, whoa, mind blown. And why is that? And then I started a little Twitter thread about why is this? Why can't you call SQL code, but you can call sys.standard.SQL code? And I was basically too thick to understand what a couple of guys at Oracle were telling me about it. But then I talked to Chris Saxon of Ask Tom fame and SQL Daily fame on Twitter. And he basically said the same thing to them and sort of broke through. So the reason you can't call SQL code inside SQL is, number one, it's not .qualified with any package name. It's defined in the standard package, so you don't have to reference it with sys.standard.SQL code in PL SQL. But in the SQL language, since it's not .qualified, the only way to resolve the reference to it is as a SQL function. SQL code is literally not defined as a SQL function, not callable. Same thing for SQL error message. And let's see, do I have a session now? Do I have a session in my ATP account? Looks like I do. So let's go ahead and share my screen.
Oh, I've already done that. Yeah, too many cooks spoil the broth here.
But now we're good, right?
Now we're good. Yes.
Okay. So let's take a look at some code now. I'll change my font size. There it is. Go up. Big, big, big. Okay. So let's start off at the very beginning. Oh, and let's return on dbms output. Come on, now you can, okay, there we go. So here's my piece of code. I'm going to erase too many rows, and then I'm going to say, show me the error message. So I run this piece of code, and it shows me that the error code, so SQL code returned -1422, and SQL error message returned this string. So that's the basic idea behind SQL error message, probably how you've all used it. Now, what you may not be aware of, because you don't need to do this very often, is that you can also call SQL error message and pass it an error code. And I thought I'd put together a little script here, and it's on Live SQL as well, so we can look at the behavior of SQL error message for different codes. So I'm passing -1, which is the same as dup val and index. I'm passing 100, which hopefully you might remember is no data found. -1403, that's curious. Let's not do that. I don't think it'll matter. -1403 is the same as no data found, but we'll see what happens. Then we've got -1422, unsigned 1422, 1. Okay, -20,000, which is the lowest or the highest value allowed for raise application error. -2100, which is a little bit beyond the range for a raise application error, and so on and so forth. All right, so I'll run this code. Let's see what we get here. So if I pass -1 to SQL error message, it looks up the generic error message. Notice it doesn't tell me about the constraint. I'll come back to that. If I pass it 100, it says, oh yeah, I know what you mean. No data found. If I pass it -1403, it says, I know what you mean. Good. It doesn't at least, throw up if you pass it -1403, which is what happens with pragma exception init. If I pass it -1422, as you'd expect and saw before, it returns the error message. If I pass it 1422, no, that's not an Oracle exception. So clearly SQL error message, which has been around for forever, believes thoroughly, and it was implemented as such, that Oracle error codes are negative unless they're number 1, that's the user-defined exception, or 100. Then let's talk about raised application error. So with raised application error, you can pass your own error code back and your own error message back. Essentially, you're telling the Oracle SQL engine, use this number for SQL code, use this string for SQL error message return. You can pass a number between -20,000 and -20,999. When I passed it -20,000, it said, okay, there's the error, but I have no message for you. It's part of the raise application error framework. -2100, this is interesting. It tells me the error number argument to raise application error is out of range. I didn't call raise application error. It just automatically said, basically what they apparently did was in this function, if you decided to use a number just a little bit over -20,999, then you're reminded, you know what, this is out of range. So I thought I'd see, well, how far can this go on? And it turns out that you get this message for -21,000, -21,001, and that's it. At that point, they figure, all right, you just don't know what you're doing. You made some sort of weird mistake. So now we just give you the message not found. Probably, I would just like to point out that probably at this moment, number 1, you've learned more about SQL error message than you really care about ever learning. And number 2, I may be the first person to ever actually take the time to show that the error message changes from -20,999 to 21,000, 21,001 and 2. Got to get some kudos for that. Okay, so let's see.
I was going to say, Stephen, we've already learned in the past few Feuertips episodes that you do the strangest things. The strangest things do, fascinate you.
Right. If not me, who should do that, right?
Well, it looks like Neil's kind of a hot second because he's got a comment here. It looks like he was getting ready for today's show and tried it today. So if you want to take a look at Neil's comment here.
I've tried it today in detail by raising program error and inserting sys.standard.sql code. and sys.standard.sql error message in the exception handler. Oh. So you can call them, but they don't work. Now that's pretty funny in the sense that, well, multiple senses perhaps. The sense I was just thinking about is I didn't even try it. I just verified that I could call it. I didn't actually look at the results. Okay. Well, that's very curious. So in other words, don't do what Niels said you could do, which is call this inside SQL. Bad, Niels.
Bad.
Just think over the last 2 weeks, Niels, you have gotten so many people excited about how they can call SQL code in SQL. And now we have to tell everybody that they can't or they should not. It's a sad day for PL SQL developers, but we'll get past it. All right. Thank you, Niels.
And Rachel thinks, even
it's
though
interesting, right?
it's probably more than we needed to know, it's still interesting.
I'm figuring at a minimum, even if you don't really learn anything significant, you get to spend 15 minutes just sort of playing around with PL SQL or watching you play around with it. And hopefully that's for some reason fun and entertaining for you. All right, let's go back to my screen for a sec. So when I ran into this issue of when I did minus 20,000, I got something. When I did minus 20,001, I got this message. This message here, or sorry, this one here. So I thought I should figure out how far I could go until it turned into this message. Now, what I could have done was just try it for 21,001, 21,002, but no. I decided that I would write a whole block of code to iterate through increasing numbers, increasingly negative numbers, to see when it would flip over. And it turned out to be just one more than I had just tried. So that was kind of a big waste of time. Okay, final topic, SQL error message versus DBMS utility format error stack. So Oracle recommends that in general, you don't use SQL error message. Now, DBMS utility format error stack cannot do this. You cannot pass a parameter to it. So what they're talking about is use it in place of this. When you're logging the error, when you're handling the error and you want to display the message or save the message. And the reason is that SQL error message, it's kind of in the name. SQL error message returns the error message. DBMS utility format error stack returns a stack of errors. Let's see what that means. And by the way, let me put out a little puzzle to any of you who happen to be good at managing or having access to multiple versions of Oracle database. I'm pretty sure that in the past, maybe up through Oracle 12, SQL error message would return a stack, but the stack could get truncated. Looks like that's changed now. So I'm going to create this little procedure, show errors. And it's just going to display the two of them. And now it's going to, oh, did it work? Compile, let's do that again. Oh, I need to reconnect. Don't do this to me.
That's strange.
Yeah, I don't have any execution buttons there. Okay, let's close that. Let's open it again. All right, that looks better. And it is reconnecting. Okay. So again, if any of you can figure out or confirm that in an earlier version of Oracle database, SQL error message doesn't behave the way I'm about to show it to you, then you get to pick the organization that we give money to this week or next week, depending when you figure it out. All right, so I'm going to compile this procedure. And then I'm basically going to create a stack of calls. So I've got proc1, which raises no data found. Proc2 calls proc1. And then propagates out value error exception. Proc3 calls proc2 and propagates out program error. So you can see I'm changing an exception to another exception. It's not a common practice, but it definitely occurs, and it's certainly valuable to be able to do it. So, and then I'm going to show the errors at the top level. So I run this code. And then I see the following. I didn't turn back on SQL Developer. It seems like if I previously had asked for DBMS output to be turned on, that you'd turn it on for me when I reconnect. Is that too much to ask? All right, run my code. All right, here's SQL error message, just the error message. Here's the formatted error stack. Program error is the original error. Then that was propagated out to value error and then no data found. So you can see this, you can see the propagation up through the programs. So that's the difference between a stack and an error message. And another reason to choose format error stack over SQL error message, or you could get real fancy and you could use your little call stack. which is a package that was added in Oracle 11G, I believe. Oops, util. There we go. 12C. So util call stack can actually be used in place of SQL error message, DBMS utility format call stack, format error stack, and format error backtrace. But I think there's very little reason for you to use it. Just call these DBMS utility functions instead. In fact, I'd be really surprised if they haven't already been rewritten to use util call stack and make it easier for you. Right now, finally, Oracle recommends that you use DBMS utility format error stack unless you're using for all with save exceptions. And here's what's going on with that piece of recommendation. So I've got a program that does a for all without save exceptions. It tries to update the first name of the employee to these names. Some of them are way too big. So if I run this program, I get an error. Or at 12899, the value is too large for the column. The actual value is 1,000 characters long and you can only have 20. So that's what happened when I tried to update the row with this value. And then it immediately stopped because I didn't use save exceptions. I can use save exceptions. I can add save exceptions, and that says keep on going, save the exception information, and I'll look at it later through the bulk exception pseudo collection. When I run this code and I report on the output, here's what I see. So without going through all the details, I'm pretty sure I covered this previously, and I'll probably cover it again on a Feuertip. But you can see here that I found two errors. There were two names that were too long, so there are two errors that I was able to iterate through afterwards. But when I got the error message, and here's how I got it, I basically went to the, here we go, SQL% bulk exceptions. I went to that statement. I got the error code, which is the SQL code value. I had to multiply it by -1 because for some reason, the folks who implemented for all save exceptions decided to save the integers as unsigned integers, not as negatives. All right. So you got to multiply it by -1 to pass it to SQL error message. And of course, if you want to get an error message from a code, you can't use DBMS utility format error stack. That just shows you for the current sequence of errors. And at this point, we've come out of the for all statement, and the current error code is -24381. So that's why when you're working with for all save exceptions, you can't use SQL error message. You can't use DBMS utility format error stack. Use SQL error message instead. And the same thing is true for log errors. So with log errors, just to very quickly show you what I'm talking about here, also covered in a previous Feuertip. With log errors, I can add the log errors keyword, and this basically says at a row level, if a single row update or insert or delete fails, save that error information and keep on going. And the error information is saved into a persistent database error logging table that you create in your schema or whichever schema. And again, the error code that is saved is unsigned. So if you want to iterate through the values in that table, for example, here's the error table for employees. If I wanted to iterate through them, I would have to call SQL error message, multiply by -1 to get the generic error message. And I didn't explain, right now let's go back and talk about the generic error message. So let's run this code again. Yep, get up. That's it. Okay, no more dog on my lap. It's like liberated. Again, if I run this code, the error that I get has all this information in it. This is the name of the column, or it might be the name of the constraint, et cetera, et cetera. But when I call it within SQL except with SQL error message, all it gives me is the generic message. So the column information, the actual and maximum, they go away. All I'm doing is looking up essentially the text template for that error message. And as I'm pretty sure I mentioned previously in the Feuertip, the reason they did this, it's an unfortunate loss of information, right? This is pretty valuable stuff, all of it. The reason they did that is to look up constraint information or column information is relatively slow. The whole point of for all is to move quickly through the bulk operation. So they decided they would just store the SQL code. You're going to have to deal with the lack of information thereof. All right, that takes care of my log errors exploration, or my SQL error message exploration. Do we have more comments to look at?
So there's a few, you have a few fans, of course. So Jamal's just commenting
Thanks,
that
Jamal.
she enjoyed watching you. And Claudia, I know you've covered this before. Claudio is waiting for your follow-up to the best PL SQL book ever.
So Claudio, don't wait. I would love it if I could tell you that there was a new edition coming out that went up through Oracle 19 or 21 or 23, but currently O'Reilly, my publisher, has not agreed to do a new edition. So go ahead and get the 12C book. Of course, it doesn't cover a relatively small number, but important number of features in PL SQL, like qualified expressions. But it's still everything else in the book will be valuable, and it's all the core of PL SQL. Next.
A few comments from Rachel.
So we use an ERP that does not always properly handle autonomous transactions. So the first part of the transaction may get committed to one table, but the second part of the transaction will not be. Do you handle the exceptions or logged errors automatically? For example, using a trigger on that log table to review all parts of the transaction. Rachel, I'm not sure I follow. So an autonomous transaction is a procedure or function that will make changes and then commit those changes without affecting anything else. So that's an autonomous transaction is a standalone transaction, which can be saved independently of your business transaction. It sounds like if you've got changes to one table, but then the next not being saved, it sounds like part of the transaction is inside an autonomous transaction and part of it isn't. Are there two separate autonomous transaction procedures? If you could do some think about rephrasing that or help me understand better, that would be great. And Claudia, you have my 12C book. Much appreciated. Thanks. Yeah, so hopefully, Rachel, you can give me a little bit more clarification on that. If not, feel free to send me an email at sfeuerstein@insum.ca, and I'll be happy to take a look in more detail. Thank you for posting that, Michelle. So let's roll on. So first of all, let's see. I posted a little quiz. If anybody could figure out why something, then I would let them choose the organization, and I don't even remember what it was now. That's your job, Michelle.
Oh dear, I was only half paying attention, Stephen, but it was something around the different versions of the database.
All right. If in an earlier version of Oracle database, like 12 or 11 or 10, whether or not Sql Error Message returned a stack. I remember it returning a stack, but truncating. And then DBMS utility format error stack would not truncate. But it's not happening anymore on 18 and 19. I think they cleaned up Sql Error Message. Anyway, if anybody can find out, let me know. That'd be great. Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you 3 organizations and also talk about a favorite book. And do we have a winner of who will choose the organization for this week?
How about we ask Claudio?
Yes, Claudio, thank you for being my fan and buyer of my book.
I'll
show you 3 groups. You decide which you'd like InSum to give $25 to this week. And I'm going to share my screen, or you share my screen while I get rid of that.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
So 3 organizations this week: the Octopus Foundation, the Coral Reef Alliance, and the Climate Justice Initiative. So going back to the start, Octopus Foundation, I'm sure I've talked about them before. We might even have shown this organization a similar one.
Yes.
Octopuses are amazing creatures. They have a completely different kind of brain than us, brain structure, and they are incredibly smart and also very funny. They play jokes and pranks on people who study them in tanks, unfortunately. Really incredible individuals, and partly because they show us how even in our planet, how intelligence can vary in form and how it's evolved over the years. Just think about if we ever happen to meet some life form that didn't start in this world, how different it would be. And hopefully we'll respect it a lot more than we respect the other forms of intelligent life on this planet. So octopuses. And apparently octopi is not the correct plural.
Really? Because I was totally going to say octopi. All right.
Coral Reef Alliance. If you don't know this, coral reefs are dying. They're being bleached all across the planet because of rising sea temperatures and growing more acidic, the ocean growing more acidic. And the coral reefs are basically the bottom of the whole food chain for the ocean and for the planet. If we lose the coral reefs, it will not only be a crime against the universe, really, but it will pretty much end a lot of life on this planet. So there are efforts to save it. It's not clear that we can, but certainly anything we can do to help would be great. And finally, I realized that all the organizations I've been talking about recently have been, save various non-human species that we are threatening with extinction, which I don't back away from. But also we need to make sure that we support those indigenous peoples who often live in the areas that are the last reserve of biodiversity, of massive numbers of forms of life on this planet. And we need to help them survive and continue to be guardians of those areas. And so Climate Justice Initiative is all about providing funds and resources and support to those indigenous peoples. So let me know when you've got a choice there. In the meantime, I'm going to move on to my favorite book. So let's see, I'm going to pick it up. And why don't we stop sharing for a second? Because
Sure. I just wanted to remind Claudio, if you're still there, if you can pick one of the three organizations.
Claudio, Octopuses, Coral Reef, or Indigenous Peoples. Who will you choose to save? All right. So my book of the week is called The Ants by Edmund O. Wilson and Bert Haldover. It's massive. Like I say, I don't really expect any of you to buy it. It costs about $150. It is the most comprehensive compendium of ants as a genus. It's not a species, right? There's lots of different species of ants. It's easy to feel creeped out about invertebrates, bugs, and so forth. It's just the way we're wired, essentially. But all species are incredible, and ants are just totally amazing. First of all, I believe the biomass of ants is the greatest of any family of living organisms in the planet, even greater than the bloated biomass of humans on planet Earth. So there are enormous numbers of ant species, enormous numbers of ants. And the way they interact, the way they build these superorganisms, those hives, are just incredible. And just one comment that I want to make about them is that if you read books, even by Edmund O. Wilson, who is the #1 authority on ants in the world, and an amazing, amazing scientist and naturalist, they talk about how these ants have tiny little brains. They're not really capable of thought. They just respond by instinct. And the way they communicate is actually with chemical signaling. It's really quite amazing to learn how they work. But every time I read things like that, especially from somebody like Edmund Wilson, especially from scientists and naturalists who are such great believers in evolution by natural selection, I've got to say, what are you thinking? We can't even know for sure what's happening in other human brains, even though they're so similar to ours. The fact that we would dismiss other creatures as they can't think, they can't do this, everything they do is by instinct, seems like ignorant and speciesist. The bottom line is that we don't know how, #1, how ants think and how many neurons it takes to have thoughts and have self-awareness, but also this idea that other creatures just live by instinct and we live by reason and rationality and so on. Well, first of all, the current political situation in the United States shows that most of us don't function by reason and rationality very much. But also, of course, humans act by instinct as well. Most of what we do is instinctual, just like every other creature in the world. We just had this layer of neocortex on top of it that we use to justify what we decided by instinct. So I hope the next time you hear anybody say, oh, that they just do that by instinct, there's no reason to think they actually like it. For example, an eagle soaring above us, looking at the ground below. Do you think they're just like instinctually flying around and don't think about what they're doing? Or are they looking down and saying, what a bunch of losers down there. Wow, they can fly. That's what I think they're thinking. So do we have a chooser? Did anybody choose?
We do. So Claudio chooses octopuses, octopi, octopus.
Claudia, are you referring to James Bond Octopussy movie? Is that what you're referring to? That'd be great. Although I'm sure there are some excellent movies about octopuses in general.
I did want to say, Stephen, I really appreciate your book recommendations, and I hope people in the audience do as well. I started reading Your Inner Fish just this past weekend, and I'm really, really enjoying that very much. So I thank you for that.
It's so entertaining.
It really is.
Remarkable.
Yeah. So
a tweet I put out on my Twitter account the other day was a question about educating our children. What should be the priorities? And to me, the most important thing that children should be taught, #1, is how their bodies work and what you need to do in the world to live healthy, vibrant lives. We don't even really do that. And that partly involves teaching children, evolution by natural selection at an early age. And the second thing is that we should learn about how to live in the natural world, how the natural world works, and respect it and honor it and be privileged to live in it. And then after that, we should be taught how to fit into human civilization, basically be a cog in the vast machine. Because that is really what most human education is about. It's not about the rest of the planet. It's about this part of the planet that we've colonized, now most of it, and created this surface on top of the planet. And now you got to fit into that. So there are some tips for educating your children. If you got little kids, teach them about their bodies, even if you can teach them whatever you can, and take them outside and make sure they love the outdoors. Of course they do. Everybody loves the outdoors.
That's great advice. Stephen, I realize, we go into this show every week and we don't do sometimes we don't do sort of basic, people might be new, they might be catching the replay. So just a quick reminder that Stephen's here every week, every Wednesday live. So join us. This is a weekly thing that I'm going to say we do, but that Stephen does. And there's a page on our website to get, past episodes, upcoming episodes. So just a little, for the new folks or people catching the replay, this is a weekly.
This is number 20. So there are 19 other videos with blog posts that explore each of these different topics. Yeah. And they're usually just entrees into the full load. But it'll be a great, I think, way to get started on exploring in depth some of these niche topics and not niche topics. Yep. All right. Well, I think we used up enough of people's day, and they probably want to get back to learning about the planet and studying and checking out ants. Yeah, check out ants. The next time you're walking across the sidewalk and you've got like a whole ocean of ants moving across, stop and take a look. They're so incredible. Don't step on them.
This is a trick question, maybe, but if you had like an ant infestation in your home, should I even ask the question? What would you do with that?
Well, I would try to, if I can see where they're coming in, I'd be happy to plug the hole and keep them outside.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in killing. It depends on the ants. There are fire. If you got fire ants coming in.
Yeah, you don't want
the
those.
other direction.
Yeah,
There are a number of ant species that definitely are not things you want to have around you, but most ants are pretty harmless. So I don't go crazy about it.
Okay.
But my wife has a different perspective on ants.
Right. And she probably runs the household, right?
Yes.
As she should. So. All right.
Okay. Thanks everybody.
Thanks for joining, everyone. See you next week.
Stay safe. If you're not, get vaccinated, please. The craziness of the United States these days is just beyond belief. And right now we have a pandemic of and by the unvaccinated. So Donald Trump pushed hard to get the vaccine created. I'm happy to give him credit for that. Operation Warp Speed was incredibly successful. If you happen to be a supporter of Donald Trump, remember, he is vaccinated. Every Fox News host is vaccinated. Get vaccinated. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
See you next week.
Take care. See you next week.